Imagine you go into the hospital for a radical new surgery. The doctors remove your brain, your cerebrum to be exact, and transplant it into a completely different body. When the anesthesia wears off, someone opens their eyes. Now, the million-dollar question is, who is waking up? Are you the person in the new body? Or are you the empty shell left behind on the operating table? Welcome to the podcast. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most fundamental, mind-bending questions in existence. Not the poetic who am I, but the metaphysical, ontological question of what are we? And joining me to unpack this fascinating naturalistic and philosophical maze is our resident expert. So, let's start right there with that brain transplant. It feels like common sense that I go where my brain goes, right?
Right, that is the classic intuition most of us have. We naturally feel that our identity travels with our conscious mind. But the text we are exploring today, based on Rory Madden's work, challenges us to step back and redefine the very question we are asking. We aren't asking the superficial descriptive question of what human persons are. We are asking a perspectival, first-person plural question. What exactly is this we? What kind of entity actually persists through change? Modern contemporary philosophy has mostly rejected the old armchair theories like a magical Cartesian soul hovering in the body. Instead, it takes an empirically informed, naturalistic approach. The big debate right now is between animalism, which is the idea that we are fundamentally biological organisms, and alternative views like neo-Lockeanism, which suggests we are psychological entities. And that brain transplant thought experiment you mentioned is the ultimate stress test for these theories.
It really is, because if animalism is true, and I am strictly a biological organism, then I shouldn't be able to survive a brain transplant. The original animal doesn't travel with the brain. It gets destroyed or left behind. So if I feel like I'm waking up in the new body, doesn't that immediately prove animalism wrong and show that I'm actually just a psychological being?
That is exactly the pushback animalism gets, and it gives rise to something called the thinking animal problem. It goes like this. If you say we are psychological persons coinciding with a biological animal, you create a bizarre double-counting issue. Think about it. The biological animal sitting in your chair right now has a brain, eyes, and ears, so it must be perceiving and acting. But if you are a person distinct from the animal, then there are actually two experiences sitting in your chair right now. You, the person, and the animal. And that leads to a terrifying epistemic puzzle. How do you know which one you are? How do you know you are the psychological person and not the biological animal falsely believing it is a person?
Oh wow, that is deeply unsettling. I never thought about it like that. It's like I have a biological roommate in my own head that I can't get rid of. So how do animalists defend themselves against the brain transplant intuition without falling into that trap?
They do it by completely redefining what biological persistence means for a human being. We tend to think of biology as just meat, metabolism, and vegetative functions. But the text argues that for an organism to persist, it relies on self-maintenance mechanisms. For a single-celled amoeba, that's just basic metabolism. But for animals, and especially for Homo sapiens, our persistence crucially involves cognition, perception, learning, flexible behavior, adapting to sociocultural environments. All of this is realized by the nervous system and the cerebrum. Psychology is not some alien ghost haunting the biological machine. It is a biologically grounded feature. Thinking is literally how our specific type of animal survives.
That makes so much sense. So, thinking is just as biological for us as breathing or digesting. But wait, if they merge psychology and biology like that, what is their actual answer to the brain transplant scenario? Who wakes up?
They arrive at a really elegant, best candidate hybrid view. For humans, non-psychological continuity, like basic vegetative functions, and cerebral psychological continuity are both sufficient for survival. But in a weird fission case like a brain transplant, psychology dominates. And this isn't just arbitrary cheating. The cerebrum sustains far more characteristic causal connections for our specific kind of organism than any other body part. Also, they point out that you can create a new organism by detachment, kind of like grafting a plant cutting. So moving the brain isn't just moving a soul, it's detaching the core biological survival engine of the organism and letting it grow into a new one. Biological reality actually supports animalism if you understand biology correctly.
Okay, let me pause and digest that because it fundamentally shifts how I view my own body. But I want to pivot to something even more foundational that the text brings up, which honestly melted my brain a little bit. Before we even figure out if we are an animal or a mind, is it possible that there is no we at all? I'm talking about this no-bearer theory regarding our experiences. Can you break down what it means for an experience to not have a bearer?
Absolutely. Traditionally, we think of conscious sensory experiences as relational. The classic analogy is a grin. You cannot have a grin without a grinner. The grin is a modification of a bearer. But the no-bearer theory challenges this entirely. It argues that conscious sensory experiences are ontologically self-standing. If you sit quietly and do completely unprejudiced introspection, what do you actually find? You don't find a self holding an experience, you just find a succession of sensory qualities. You feel the fizz and hum of bodily sensations, you see a reddish-orange visual field, you hear a distant noise. The argument is that if the nature of experience is fully revealed to reflection, and reflection reveals no bearer, then no bearer exists. The experience is just happening all by itself.
But hold on, if there is no central me having the experience, why does it feel so contained? My headache is in my head. My thoughts are reacting to what my eyes see. Everything feels tied together. If there's no bearer, isn't it just total chaos? The text mentions a Cheshire Cat objection, right? Like, how can an experience just float in the void like the Cheshire Cat's smile?
Exactly. The Cheshire Cat objection is the main weapon against the no-bearer theory. But the theorists have a very sophisticated comeback. They say, sure, there's no ontological bearer, but there are other robust forms of ownership that explain why things feel tied together. First, there's locus. Bodily sensations appear spatially contained within a bounded physical object. So, the causal interface. Your visual experience depends on your specific head and eyes, but that's a contingent physical dependency, not a deep metaphysical one. Third, experiences form causally interrelated bundles. And fourth, they create an abstract center based on co-consciousness. It's like a shadow created by all these intersecting relations. A great way to understand it is the model proposed by the philosopher Lichtenberg. When water falls from the sky, we don't say, a weather god is raining, we just say, it rains. The no-bearer theory says we should think of consciousness the same way. There isn't an I that thinks, rather, it thinks. Experience just depends on generic physical conditions being met.
It thinks. That is incredibly poetic, but also deeply alienating. If it is just thinking, then what happens to the word I? When I say, I am hungry, or I am confused by philosophy, am I just uttering a sound that refers to absolutely nothing? Is the concept of the self totally dead?
Not quite. The text makes a really crucial distinction here. Just because we reject the traditional assumption that we are bearers, that does not automatically mean no self. Thinkers like Anscombe have argued that the word I lacks any actual reference, but the text pushes back hard against that, using the principle of epistemic charity. Even if there isn't a magical, indivisible soul-bearer, self-representations like I plausibly refer to the human organism as a composite system. It refers to the physical bundle, the mind plus body system that we have direct, reflexive knowledge of through things like proprioception and autobiographical memory. Sure, our internal representations might have mismatches, like how we instinctively mislocate ourselves as sitting somewhere right behind our eyes, but the reference still lands on the biological organism. So, proving a no-self view is an uphill struggle because the biology provides a solid anchor for the I.
That is a relief, honestly. So I am still me, even if the me is a highly complex biological system that coordinates the fizz and hum of experiences. But let's push this biological system to its absolute limits. The text dives into the concept of multiplicity. If we are these biological organisms, what happens when the physical boundaries get blurred or duplicated? You mentioned earlier that there could be two experiencers in one chair. But what about the thinking parts problem? Do my unattached parts have their own thoughts?
That is one of the wildest corners of this debate. The thinking parts problem asks this. If a mutilated thinker, say just a head, can have a neural configuration that produces thoughts, then doesn't the undetached head currently sitting on your shoulders also have that exact same neural configuration? And if it does, shouldn't your head be thinking its own thoughts, independent of the whole organism? If you follow that logic, there are countless nested thinkers inside you right now. Your head is thinking, your brain is thinking, your left hemisphere is thinking. A no-bearer theorist might just shrug and accept this, viewing experiences as shared across overlapping objects, like jewels nested inside one another. But if we want to select just one bearer from the outside, the text introduces two principled ways to solve this.
I definitely want to solve this, because the idea of my head having a separate inner monologue from my whole body is deeply disturbing. What are the two approaches to fixing this nested thinker's nightmare?
The first is the minimal realizer approach. This argues that for any given experience, the primary bearer is the absolute smallest physical part whose intrinsic state is sufficient to produce it, like a specific subregion of neural tissue. The larger wholes, like your entire brain or your whole animal body, only bear that experience derivatively. But the text points out a fatal flaw here. This approach still multiplies small thinkers everywhere, so it fails to resolve the core issue of unity. The much stronger solution is the teleofunctionalist approach.
Teleofunctionalism. That sounds heavy. Can you translate that into everyday language? What does evolutionary purpose have to do with who is having a thought?
It changes the game entirely. Teleofunctionalism says that a true bearer of an experience is a system whose parts have the evolved natural function of causally mediating between inputs, outputs, and internal states. Human cognitive systems did not evolve to coordinate a detached head or a single neural pathway. They evolved to coordinate the entire animal. The whole biological organism, therefore only the whole animal meets this condition. Undetached parts, like your head or a chunk of your brain, are merely de facto causal unities. They are not teleofunctional unities. They aren't the thing evolution designed to be the operator. This elegantly kills the thinking parts problem. Your head doesn't think, the animal thinks using the head.
Oh, that is brilliant. Evolution is the glue that holds the identity together. Because the system was designed to drive the whole meat suit, only the whole meat suit gets to claim the title of the thinker. But this must get incredibly complicated when we look at real-world medical anomalies. How does teleofunctionalism handle something like dicephalus, conjoined twins who share one body but have two distinct heads and brains, like Abigail and Brittany Hensel? We look at them and intuitively see two people. But based on what you just said, if they share one animal body, are they metaphysically just one entity?
This is exactly where the theory gets put to the ultimate test. The argument usually says, there are two of us, but only one animal here. If you want to fight that, you have two choices. You could take the exclusionary response, which claims they are actually non-animal thinkers, basically arguing they are just two undetached heads. But we already know the problems with saying parts can think. So teleofunctionalism leans into the disunity response. It argues that there is in fact only one animal, but this single animal possesses a radically disunified consciousness. Because both brains function to coordinate the survival of that single shared biological body, the single animal remains the sole bearer of all the experiences. It is one biological organism experiencing the world through two entirely separate, non-communicating streams of consciousness.
That is profoundly counterintuitive. But logically, I see how the framework forces that conclusion. If the whole animal is the bearer, and there is only one shared circulatory system, one shared set of limbs to coordinate, then it is one entity with a divided mind. What about the other famous medical case, the split brain patients? The ones who had their corpus callosum severed to stop seizures, and suddenly their left hand is trying to put on a shirt while their right hand is trying to take it off. Does that mean the surgery accidentally created a second person inside their skull?
That was a popular theory for a while, that splitting the brain split the person. But through the lens of teleofunctionalism, the text gives a much more grounded answer. It interprets the duality of behavior in split brain patients simply as a malfunction of the animal's unified coordination function. It is not evidence of two new bearers popping into existence. The single animal still bears all the mental states. However, it now bears them relative to specific brain parts. The system was designed by evolution to be unified, and it has just suffered a mechanical breakdown in its internal communication. It's a pathology of the biological system, not the spontaneous birth of a new metaphysical self.
It's fascinating how biology keeps grounding these wild philosophical thought experiments. We started by wondering if we were just floating minds that could be transplanted, or if we didn't exist at all, just a fizz and hum of weather-like experiences. But it all comes back to the organism.
Exactly. The core takeaway from Madden's analysis is that trying to separate human psychology from human biology is a mistake. Our psychology, our ability to think, perceive, and feel, is the primary evolutionary survival tool of our specific biological species. We aren't ghost-driving meat machines, and we aren't disjointed illusions. We are highly integrated biological systems whose very nature is to experience the world. Whether it's surviving a brain transplant by regenerating around a new core, or maintaining identity despite radical disunity in conjoined twins, the biological foundation holds steady.
That brings such a deep sense of grounding. The next time I catch myself wondering, who am I? Or feeling disconnected, I can literally just look at my hands, or feel my heartbeat, and remember that I am an incredibly complex organism, and my thoughts are just my biology doing its job. It really bridges the gap between the existential dread of philosophy and the hard reality of science. Thank you so much for breaking down such a dense and mind-expanding text with me today. And to our listeners, I highly recommend sitting quietly for a moment today. Try to feel that fizz and hum of your own sensory experience and appreciate the incredible biological machinery that makes it all possible. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.